Today we're going to learn a little bit more about water. It sounds like from the looks of the number of people up here, we're going to learn a lot more about water in the city of Salem with regards to last year's little fiasco with that, and then I hope we learn about aging infrastructure. I hope we learned about all the different things that affect our water system here in Salem today. For some reason, I don't have my list of our sponsors, but I do want to call out to those folks that we always, there they are. Let's recognize again, as we always do, KMUZ, Virgil T. Golden Funeral Homes, Pioneer Trust Bank, and Lou Jean Fobert Graphic Design for their continued support of our organization. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Condon, who is the program lead today, and I'm going to come down and join you so I can see their slides.
Thank you, Chris. Final Salem City Club program of the season. How appropriate that the Salem City Club features the city of Salem. So we are delighted to do that. This is a program that actually all year members were asking about, are we going to have a program on water? BPA discussion was really more started with a conversation with respect to Detroit, and that we'll hear more about hopefully next year. But this was obviously an important program. There are a few topics that we know touch everyone in the audience, and the city of Salem's drinking water likely touches all of us. So a big thank you to Steve Powers, who I think it was at the BPA program, where I had a brief conversation with him and said we'd love to have the city come and talk to us about water, and he said, let's do it. And so he went back to the office, and Courtney Knox was absolutely great to work with to put this program together with the right people. And probably the biggest feature, not to diminish what's going to be presented up here, but the biggest feature of this program is the Q&A session because of everybody's experience with it. So to really introduce the program in the city of Salem, I'd like to have Steve Powers come up, and he'll start the program today. So thanks for coming.
Thank you, Cindy, and the program committee for this opportunity to share information with you regarding drinking water, to have a conversation with you through the Q&A on the importance of the drinking water to all of us, and certainly to have some discussion about lessons learned from last year. Last year was humbling for me, and I think for others in the organization. We learned that nature can disrupt practices and procedure systems that have been in place and have worked very well for generations. And over the past 12 months, we've taken that learning and we've improved. And the panel, the group before you, is going to go into details on those improvements. We focused on improving drinking water treatment, and we have a clear path forward for keeping our drinking water safe in the future, a clear path that's been vetted and discussed by City Council, and they'll continue to have those opportunities. For this algae season, we are better prepared and have more choices to clean the water we get from the North Santiam River before it arrives in our homes and in our businesses. And if needed, we have equipment, partnerships, thank you Marion County, and volunteer resources in place to distribute water more quickly community-wide. We, as a community, are very fortunate to have a knowledgeable, dedicated, and competent team that is taking care of our drinking water. I was with them for many hours last year, and I can tell you without any hesitation that the people before you on this stage cared very deeply about the community and care very deeply about keeping us all safe. The number of hours, the energy, the efforts were extraordinary. These are just a few of the key individuals, the key teammates before you. Their description is in the sheet, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that as Heather Dimke walks us through the city's preparations for keeping our drinking water safe. So, Heather?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm actually floored by the venue here. This is just beautiful, quite a stunning arrangement, so I hope everyone enjoys their lunch. I have about 20 minutes presentation. That'll be followed by Jude Grounds here from Carollo Engineering. We'll have plenty of room for questions at the end of that, so do ask away. Thankfully, we also have Lacey Gores-Priest, our water quality supervisor, up here on the left, and Brian Martin, our city's engineer, to help with those questions. So just to start out today, so my role at present, I hope to provide to you all a high-level overview of some of the events that happened last summer, primarily the lessons learned, as well as some of the tips, strategies, tools that we are now employing this year as we move into a new algae season here in Salem. We now understand blue-green algae can start occurring in our watershed anytime from late April through October, November. So we are now in the midst of algae season in this area. So perfect timing for this discussion today, and as I understand, this is the last one of the season. Perfect timing all around. I'm happy to be here. And this worked a minute ago. Woo. Let's see. Oh, no. Oh, you got it? Yep, it was upside down, so it's... Oh. See, I'm so glad he's here to help. There's always got to be some kind of technical with myself. Okay, so taking a step back, so Salem's drinking water. What happened last summer was, quite honestly, it was scary. It was really scary for our businesses, for our residents, for staff included. This was a brand new experience to us. Cyanotoxins, as we recall from blue-green algae, made their way through our watershed, and for the first time in city and state history, they made it into our treated drinking water. They were detected in our treated drinking water. And that is what prompted the first ever drinking water advisory that was issued by the city for vulnerable populations. That began at the end of May. So a very scary time for everyone. As I mentioned, this was the first, so we have learned so much, thankfully, since last year. And I'm excited to talk about that today. So taking a step back, though, where does Salem get its drinking water? What is the source for Salem's drinking water? Steve gave a brief update. The North Santiam River watershed is where all of Salem's drinking water comes from. It's a large watershed east of Salem, up towards Detroit, about 800 square miles in size. It includes a wide range of different land uses, anything from forest timber harvesting, forest practices, agriculture, recreation, of course. There's also 2 large Army Corps of Engineer owned and operated dams up in the system. We have Detroit and Big Cliff, and those dams do serve to provide flood mitigation and power as well. So there's a lot going on in the watershed. We have downstream of the second dam from Big Cliff down to where the water's treated, about 26 miles of open waterway. Since the late 1940s, for over 80 years, the Guerin Island drinking water treatment facility has been our primary method for treatment using slow sand filtration. Thankfully, to the pristine nature of our source water, that has served us very well for over 80 years at this point. But we've learned a lot, as I said. The photo over here, oops, now I've got 2 presentations going. The photo now before you is actually from Detroit Lake, Detroit Reservoir. This is blue-green algae. And blue-green algae is the source during die-off primarily of the cyanotoxins rather, that are now a concern for drinking water for us. The exact cause of these cyanotoxins is yet undetermined. It's not all blue-green algae that causes them. It's only certain types. There's a lot of speculation at present that increasing temperatures for water and increasing nutrient loads, potentially from recent forest fires up in the watershed, that may be contributing to increased blue-green algae, and that may be contributing to the cyanotoxins. That has yet to be determined 100%. We have scientists that are looking at that now. Thankfully, as a part of this, this first ever event, we've now partnered with scientists from all over, really, to get a better understanding of this. Specifically, we've partnered with the Prediction Lab, which includes scientists from Oregon State University that are looking at the data that we've been collecting for years, and they're running that data through models in an attempt to try to get down to the bottom of what the cause is and what some of the other factors might be that are involved. So before I move on, I'll just point out the City of Salem has monitored up in the watershed for a number of years, and that's a requirement of the Safe Drinking Water Act, for a number of different pollutants or potential contaminants. Proactively, since 2011, the city has been monitoring for cyanotoxins. The graphic here is somewhat of a snapshot, a quick look at our watershed. It's not to scale, obviously. See if I can get the, so this shows the two dams up high in the watershed, and it shows Guerin Island. And this is where, again, all of the treatment for Salem's drinking water occurs. Guerin Island here in the middle. So after the water flows down, I just would like to share the process for you as it has stood for 80 years. After the water flows down from the dam system it flows into, through an intake. It's called the intake right here at this east side of the island. See if I can show up on this side. It flows into the intake onto the island, and from there it's routed into our slow sand filtration system. We have several slow sand filtration basins on the island, and those actually function through the use of a biological layer that grows on top of that sand. This biological layer is called a Schmutzdecke. That's the official term, and it's actually sourced from microbes that come in from the river system. Now that Schmutzdecke is what has primarily filtered Salem's water for a number of years now. And it essentially just digests, or it consumes the pathogens as they filter down through the sand layer. And as I understand, at about 14 inches, once the water has filtered down to that level, about 98% of the contaminants in our water have already been removed. It's a pretty efficient method. We've been very lucky to have been able to utilize this, and we intend to continue to do so. Once the water has been filtered through the sand system, it's then put into a perforated pipe system and transferred to the other end of the island, where we have always added small amounts of chlorine as a final disinfectant. And we've always, for years, added soda ash to prevent corrosion in household plumbing, and fluoride for dental health. So that's the normal process for treating Salem's drinking water. Now, if the graphic was a bit unhelpful, here's an actual photo of Guerin Island itself, and that shows the sand filtration ponds. Just a little better reference for you. So, what is different now? What did we learn as a result of this big experience for us here in Salem last year? We've learned a lot. We've learned that our slow sand filtration system is even more powerful than we thought. As we reached the end of the season last year, our test data revealed that the Schmutzdecke was actually removing cyanotoxins. You know, when we first saw those cyanotoxins hit early in the algae season, some had made their way through. There's some thought that maybe perhaps the Schmutzdecke, or that biological layer, might not have been as mature as maybe it should have been during this time of year. And there was other issues going on at the same time as well. But towards the end of the season, we had a strong biological layer that was removing cyanotoxins. So how can we help to facilitate that process in the future? We've learned that we can add acetic acid to the river water as it's flowing into those sand basins. Acetic acid is basically a form of vinegar, and that actually feeds the microorganisms in that Schmutzdecke. It acts like a source of carbon for those organisms, and it helps to strengthen that layer. So we've already, this year, as we enter into the algae season, we've already begun to inject acetic acid into that water. We've also learned that chlorine, you know, something we have always used in the disinfection process, is also effective at removing cyanotoxins when you do short boosts in chlorine dose. So we can temporarily increase the chlorine levels and then reduce them before it hits our distribution system, and that can be a very effective method of reducing cyanotoxins. And as probably most of you remember from last summer, we learned very quickly last summer that powdered activated carbon is also effective at removing cyanotoxins. And we have stores of that left on site for this year. How does that work? Powdered activated carbon actually binds to the algae cells and the toxins and just simply pulls it out of the water column. So we add powdered activated carbon to that initial channel, that south channel where it flows in, and it's like a pre-treatment to our drinking water before it goes into our slow sand filtration system. In addition, we have made a big investment in a brand new treatment process for Guerin Island facility. We are investing in a new ozone treatment method at Guerin Island. We have a contract in place for design as we speak, and we're hoping to have construction of that completed in 2021. Now, ozone acts in a very similar way, and I'm not going to get into details. I can't get into details. Thankfully, Jude can discuss that. But it's basically an oxidizer, just like chlorine, in that it destroys the contaminants. So it's like chlorine, it's stronger, and it will handle the cyanotoxins for us. Now, that's a long-term investment. Again, we don't have that up and running yet. 2021 is the speculated date for that. But we have these other measures in place in the meantime. And before I move on, I'll just point out ozone treatment is already used in Oregon. There's at least 2, maybe 3 facilities that are using it now. It's EPA approved. It's widely recognized as one of the strongest methods to date. So something else that's different this year from last year, when we first saw those cyanotoxins in our drinking water system, there were no rules on how to deal with these in our water. We were operating under Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, health guidelines for cyanotoxins. Since this occurrence last year, the Oregon Health Authority has enacted new rules. We have new OARs for cyanotoxins in drinking water. These rules apply to 2 different types. There are actually several cyanotoxins, the microsystems and cylindrospermopsin. The rules clarify the sampling method, testing locations, and notification requirements for the public and for the regulatory authorities. So it's very nice to now have those rules in place as we move forward, kind of mapping out that process. Interestingly, as I stated earlier, the city has already been monitoring for cyanotoxins for a number of years, since 2011. There was no requirement for us to do that. Now, with these new rules in place, we're going to see a lot of other agencies, those that are susceptible to algae in their watershed, also monitoring for these. So it'll be interesting to see if other folks start to see these as well. Last year, at the end of the season, we were finally able to bring online here in Salem our own testing system for cyanotoxins. This made a huge difference for us. The other thing, when we first started the season, we were sending all of the samples collected out of state to get results. And that took 3 days, maybe 4. So that obviously led to increase some of the confusion where there already was some to begin with. It certainly didn't help, right? So now we have our own ELISA system, times 2. Actually, we just brought another one online, so we have added redundancy. These are out at our Willow Lake laboratory, and they allow our staff who are already out there collecting samples now to get those test results within a single day, again, rather than 3 days. So looking back at our watershed, what's different about this graphic is we've added just a few numbers, 1 through 4, you'll see. Hopefully everyone can see that. In addition to the treatment measures that we now have combined for this season and potentially next season, we've learned, right? We learned how to tweak our existing measures to treat cyanotoxins. We have now an increased plan to utilize and expand the sampling that our staff have been doing based upon what we're seeing in the watershed. We now know we're entering algae season, right? So these are 4 of many sampling points. This is not all of the sampling points our staff are doing. But number 1, for example, is up at the log boom, up at Detroit Reservoir. We are looking closely at the log boom in particular as we're watching algae. There's always small amounts, or usually this time of year, small amounts of algae. But once we see that at levels that are concerning, we're going to immediately start increasing our sampling. Once we start to see toxins up at the Detroit log boom, which we anticipate we likely will again, we're going to start adding chlorine boosts and maybe start adding powdered activated carbon if we see those toxins move downstream. The lowest point on there, number 4, that's actually that's a sampling point after the Guerin Island Treatment Facility. That's the last point before the water enters the Salem water distribution system. And this is an if we see toxins at that point after treatment at Oregon Health Authority advisory levels, as we did last year, we are ready to issue a new advisory for this year. Important point here is, so we have measures in place. We are watching this closely, very closely this year. We cannot control the cyanotoxins, and in fact, we're assuming they're going to be in the system again. We are prepared to react with different treatment measures, but we're also prepared to act quickly this year and initiate a new advisory if need be. We certainly cannot rule that out. So a lot of the questions last year were centered on communication and some of the questions and concerns and the timing of our communication. So just quickly, if we reach that point for an advisory in particular, how are we going to get that message out? And I'll just add that, 1, we will use our community alert system, and if you haven't signed up for that already, please do. It's very easy to do. We only use it for emergencies, but if we hit that point, that will be used. You can sign up quickly to get phone calls, emails, text alerts. We'll also, of course, send news releases out quickly to local and regional media. We're going to use social media, which just continues to increase in usage, Facebook and Twitter, and have our partners share Nextdoor. And we're going to take full advantage of our website this year as well. So if we do go into an advisory this summer, we are very well prepared this summer to activate quickly the water distribution sites as we did last year for bulk distribution of drinking water. We're actually ready to, if need be, increase our stations from 8 to 18. We've got sources of water lined up. Last year, the folks in Kaiser were very gracious, and they provided us water. We have other local sources for drinking water. And we're ready to supply up to 150,000 gallons a day. We do intend to continue the bottled water deliveries, and this is delivery only for folks that cannot get out to the water distribution stations. That's understood that there's a number of folks in the community that simply can't get out to do that. So we have bottled water stores on hand, and we have staff that are ready to do that quickly. I mentioned quickly our website a moment ago, and I just want to put a plug out that we have been working hard on updating the information that we had last year, adding new information and consolidating all of that information into a single location or platform on our website in an attempt to make it easier for everyone in our community. cityofsalem.net/drinking-water has everything that we've been working on. It has information about our source water. It has a link to our water quality data that we're collecting. It has information on our sampling procedures, treatment methods, and we have links to emergency information. We are encouraging our residents, as we have been doing since last summer, preparing for any kind of event. We're encouraging our residents and businesses to do the same. We have emergency information, and we also have links to Oregon's 2-week Ready campaign, which has a number of really simple tips for folks, including water, stockpiling supplies of water for you and your family. They do recommend a gallon per person per day, so for my family, that's 42 gallons for a 2-week period. But pretty simple steps that really we all should be, and I have to be reminded of, every one of us doing to prepare for any kind of event that could happen. And I think I actually touched on this, but just a quick reminder, please do sign up for the Community Alert System if you haven't. Visit our website and do take a few minutes to look at that Oregon 2 Weeks Ready. Again, very easy to use and good information. Now from that, I usually take questions. But I think we're going to save all the questions for the end, and I hope you guys have a lot because we've got some good expertise up here with me, thankfully. But with that, we're going to move into Jude, who's going to talk a bit more about the ozone.
Good afternoon. My name is Jude Grounds. I work with Crollo Engineers here in north in Portland, Oregon. I've been designing and implementing water treatment plants for the past 20 years here in Oregon and around the world, including 2 of the ozone plants that exist and are online today, the Willamette River Water Treatment Plant in Wilsonville, and most recently the Lake Oswego Tigard Water Treatment Plant in West Lynn. So I just wanted to share a little bit of some of the under-the-hood water treatment nerd stuff with you guys to pique your interest a little bit and hopefully solicit some questions. I'll try not to get too far in the weeds here. And I've noticed my presentation has a little bit of overlap with what Heather has talked about, so I might fly through a couple slides relatively quickly. With that, wanted to start off by just sharing with you this series of photos and ask you, can you tell whether or not algal toxins are present in the water? Heather mentioned that not all algal blooms and algae create cyanotoxins. So just a quick quiz here. Just in your mind, pick the one you think looks the most dangerous. I'll tell you, one of these has algal toxins of 72 micrograms per liter of microcystin. That's about 10 times more than what we saw in Salem last year. And you'll see that it's not the one on the left with that stringy algae that's a nuisance, and you certainly don't want to go swimming in it, but not a producer of cyanobacteria. It's also not the fish kill on the right. That was actually a metals leak that killed those fish. It's actually this water in the middle. So it's not always visible, and you can't always rely on that kind of green slime as an indicator of when cyanobacteria are growing. Heather showed a picture. I also included a picture here. Your water treatment system, slow sand filtration, is the oldest water treatment technology that we have. It's probably the most elegant, I would say. And in fact, all of our advances in water treatment have circled back around to biological filtration as a real key to effective treatment. It's low energy, low chemicals, and what we want to do to address algal toxins is find technologies that are appropriate and complement that existing system as best we can. Heather mentioned a few trends that we think are helping facilitate the growth of more cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, and a lot of it has to do with warming temperatures. Warming surface waters are facilitating growth of additional cyanobacteria. The types and species of cyanobacteria that we're seeing in the water are also increasing. The droughts have led to more forest fires, and that ash from the forest fires is very rich in nutrient, often phosphorus, and those phosphorus can wash down into the reservoirs and help facilitate additional cyanobacteria growth, as well as the associated concentrations of cyanotoxins that come with the increased growth. So that's where we think and why we think we're seeing this, not just here in Salem, but in watersheds throughout the Pacific Northwest. It's a problem that everyone is aware of and finding their own ways to mitigate. Now, ozone's a powerful long-term insurance policy against cyanotoxins. We scoured the research, we scoured the lessons learned from every other cyanotoxin event in the world and looked at all the available technologies to deal with them. Ozone emerged as the most cost-effective, both capital as well as long-term operations, and again, is the best to marry up with your existing treatment facilities. It also has benefits of dealing with manganese and other pathogens. It's a good disinfectant in addition to chlorine. It increases significantly the operational flexibility to deal with other challenges in the watershed. I know we used to talk about catastrophic events. What if an oil spill happened or a tanker truck spilled over or something like that? This gives the treatment operators additional tools in their tool belt to deal with all of these kinds of unknowns. And as I mentioned, it actually complements the biological system there. And briefly, what it essentially does is takes organic carbon like leaf, like the stains you see on sidewalks from leaves, that kind of humic and fulvic acids. Those are very complex organic carbons that typically bacteria can't necessarily metabolize. It's just too complicated. Ozone can break those apart into small bite-sized pieces that the biology on your filters can actually digest. So we're actually removing more of that organic carbon and eliminating its ability to react with chlorine downstream, where we can form disinfection byproducts. So it actually does a great job of increasing the overall quality of the water. Now this is just a little schematic of the major components of an ozone system, and I'll just walk through these briefly. First is the oxygen supply. Typically, we use liquid oxygen, and this is very similar to what you see at like many of your hospitals have liquid oxygen storage, and then vaporizers that sit next to them that turn that liquid oxygen into gaseous oxygen. We then put that gaseous oxygen through an ozone generator system, essentially exciting the electrons in that oxygen supply and forming about 10% efficiency, forming ozone in that. We then take that ozone that was formed in the generator and dissolve it in the water through number 3 here, the injector and the contactor. We essentially create a space for that water to sit with that ozone in it and give it enough time to fully oxidize cyanobacteria or disinfect the pathogens we're looking for, whatever the design is. Finally, if there's any ozone left, we then quench that with a quenching agent, a reducing agent that basically reacts with that ozone and turns it back into oxygen. And any ozone that may have not dissolved and actually came out of solution as gas, we then pull off the top of the contactor and destroy that ozone, returning it back to oxygen before we release it into the environment. Now, how does this ozone system integrate with your existing system? This is kind of a process flow diagram of your existing slow sand filtration plant. We start with, on the left-hand side, with the middle intake, where we draw water from the North Saniam. In this case, we're going to be doing what we call two-stage filtration. We're going to be relying upon roughing filters that were originally designed and installed to deal with high turbidity events. You know, after the rains, when the water gets really cloudy, we often run the water through a roughing filter just to knock down those particles. We're, in this case, going to use the roughing filters to remove the cyanobacteria, the bacteria that are creating the toxins. And by removing the bodies of those bacteria themselves, we remove essentially 90% of the cyanotoxins that are in the water. What's remaining, what was outside of the bodies of those bugs, we then lift using a pump station and put that into an ozone contactor, using ozone to oxidize the remaining cyanobacteria, creating more food for the bacteria that exist on the slow sand filters. As was mentioned earlier, we may add some additional acetic acid if there's not enough carbon in there to keep that biology robust. It may need some help. We may find, and we're testing it right now, that the ozone alone is enough, and we may not need to add that acetic acid moving forward. And then from there, down through the treatment system, as Heather had explained. So again, it's a really nice marriage into your existing slow sand filters, whereby we're actually cleaning more organic carbon out of there, providing a robust treatment, multiple barriers for algal toxins, and maintaining kind of the limited chemicals that we need to add to the water in order to treat it. And finally, this is just a photograph of the ozone system for the Lake Oswego Tigard water treatment plant. That's a dielectric whereby the ozone gas passes through and we pass the electrons through it so that we bridge and make a few ozone. So that's just a little window into the actual generator. But you know, ozone is a proven technology. There are installations throughout the region that are increasing. In fact, I would say there's no modern water treatment plant that has been installed in the Pacific Northwest that doesn't include ozone. The big Willamette Water Supply Program, the city of Portland is hoping to include ozone as part of their process. So all the new planning systems are looking to integrate ozone because, again, it reduces the amount of chlorine and the associated disinfection byproducts that are formed, and it produces water that's really pleasant to taste. You know, in general, people that drink ozonated water just feel a little more optimistic about life, I would say. And that's all I have for you. So I'll go back to your question slide, or I guess it'll just go black. Thank you.
So now we'll move into the most important part of the program, which are questions. And I didn't read the paper this morning. It's sitting on my kitchen table. But I understand there was an article in the paper today that might prompt some questions as well. So we've got one microphone for questions, so be patient. And so our speakers can answer questions quickly. We've got probably more time than we generally have, but that does not give you the privilege of making comments as opposed to asking questions. We want to answer as many questions as we can. And so the microphone is out, and so we have our first question.
Bob Young, Salem City Club. I have a question for Heather, actually for any of you. When did the cyanotoxins begin last year? Was it in March, April, May? Or do we know?
Let's see if this works. Okay, can you hear me? I'll let Lacey correct me if I'm wrong. I think we started to see them at lower levels earlier in the season, but it was not until May, the end of May, where we actually saw those in our treated drinking water at health advisory levels.
Okay, the only reason I'm still hanging on to the microphone, I know we were just told not to make a comment, but I lost vision in one eye starting in May, and my doctors don't know why. So I may be a legacy of this condition that happened. I don't know what caused it. And I do want to, on the flip side of that, I do want to say that all of you folks seem to be very contrite and forthright and everything regarding this situation. So I hold no animosity toward it. It's just that I did lose the vision of one eye, and the doctors don't have a clue, but it happened in time with the cyanotoxin outbreak. Thank you very much.
John Hofer, City Club. You've indicated that with global warming, we are probably going to look at new pollutants. And my question is there a process by which you can predict what these new pollutants might be as people follow the climate change? And how well is this new system set up to be resilient enough to adjust to these new pollutants that you might see coming our way?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lacey Gores-Priest, and I'm the Water Quality Supervisor for the city, and I will try to answer your question. So absolutely, we are a heavily regulated industry, as you can imagine. So we follow regulations as established by the EPA, and those regulations are typically enforced by the Oregon Health Authority. The EPA has a list of contaminants in which there are no regulations currently set for, and as part of that, they developed the rule that's called the Unregulated Contaminant Monitoring Rule, or the UCMR. We're currently in the UCMR 4 stage, so this is the 4th round, and what they do is they ask water providers that are of certain sizes, so Salem is a large water provider, so we participate in this process. And they take a list of contaminants that are usually about 30 contaminants each round, and they have us test for them. And what they're doing is they're gathering data. They're looking at how prevalent this contaminant is and what levels folks are seeing these contaminants. And then at that point, they look at the technologies that are available to remove said contaminants. And then they start down the rulemaking process and develop drinking water regulations. So essentially, that's how new drinking water contaminants come about. Coincidentally, the cyanotoxins are on the UCMR 4 list. And so in addition to all the sampling that we were doing on our own last year, we were also participating in the UCMR 4 sampling for cyanotoxins as well. So that is part of how EPA sets the rules for new pollutants or contaminants of concern. And I think that answered part of your question, but I don't know if it answered it entirely.
Yes, how well are we set up in the new system we've got to respond to the new pollutants?
Yeah, absolutely. I am in awe of Jude's treatment nerdiness, and so he understands the ozone system much better than I do, so I'm going to let him respond to how ozone would be able to handle those additional pollutants.
And by additional pollutants, I think Lacey did a good job of kind of describing the wide net that the EPA casts in terms of identifying those pollutants. There's a lot of different types of things that I lose sleep over, and if I had a crystal ball, I would look into to see if they're coming our way. Metals, new pathogens, algal toxins, these kinds of things. I would say in that list of parameters that we are concerned about here in the Pacific Northwest, ozone does a great job of providing a barrier for all of those. And so I believe moving forward, this is the best you can do now with the crystal ball that you have to position yourself to deal with future contaminants in your watershed.
Bill Dalton, City Club. One quick comment, and that is just hearing about the ozone, my outlook on life has just gotten much more positive. I know with the Bull Run Reservoir, which serves the city of Portland, it sounds like it's a very much protected area. And listening to your description of our watershed area, it sounds like it's much more multi-use. And going back to the old saw about if you've got a problem downstream, look as much upstream as possible. What kinds of things are being done between the city of Salem, Marion County, some of the other cities that utilize that same water system? What kinds of things are being done or could be done to potentially address some of the issues that you think might be leading to the increase in cytotoxins?
So I'm going to attempt to answer your question, sir. So we have really important partnerships with other water providers on the North Santiam. We partner with the Forest Service, the Army Corps of Engineers. As mentioned previously, we've engaged with scientists from the Oregon Oregon State University to look at trending information and having them really understand the data that we've collected over the years to see if we can kind of predict when these blooms are going to occur. As you stated, absolutely, Bull Run is kind of a unique exception in that it is a private area and there are no other uses there. It's very protected. The best thing that we can do as the city of Salem and having all that multi-use affecting our watershed is paying attention to what activities are occurring, but also the monitoring that we do. So my staff is responsible for being up on the reservoir, collecting samples, taking in visual indications of what's changing in the watershed, and then working with our water treatment operators to make appropriate decisions based off of the information that they're seeing up there. We also share that information with Forest Service, Army Corps of Engineers, because we recognize we're not the only stakeholder that has a vested interest in that source. We hold summits. So yesterday we had the North Santiam Watershed Summit, which is a group of folks of interested stakeholders, and we talk about issues like spill response or drought contingency planning, because we know that we're partners in this effort, and we all want the same thing. We want a watershed that we can rely on that provides high-quality water for any sort of user, whether it's a municipal water supplier or an agricultural user. So we share information, we bring speakers in to learn about different activities that are happening in our watershed so that we can stay current, make comments when we can. But really it's about being active in the watershed monitoring and knowing what's happening up there so we can respond accordingly with our staff.
Ray Holloman, City Club. My question is, the Corps of Engineers talked about saving the fish and cutting off or reducing our water supply. What do we know about what the Corps is going to do?
That is a very timely question. Do you want to respond, Steve?
I just have the information from the Corps on their process.
Yeah, I'll let you go ahead and update if you'd like.
I'll share what the Corps has shared with us regarding their process, and then Lacey may be able to provide a little detail on what the current planning that the Corps is doing, where that's at. I think you're referring to the Detroit Dam Temperature Control and Downstream Fish Passage Project. The draft environmental impact statement is expected to be published in the Federal Register this month. And the 60-day public comment period will begin after that publication. The Army Corps is planning, is that better? The Army Corps is planning a public open house, actually several. The one in Salem is June 4th, Tuesday, June 4th, from 5:30 to 7:30 at the ODFW headquarters at 4034 Fairview Industrial Drive. There's also an open house planned in Staten and Gates. And that's where the Corps will share with the public their current planning for the temperature control project, and there are several variations, several options that they've been studying, and I think they're going to be sharing those at the public open house, including their preferred alternative. How did I do, Lacey?
That's perfect.
Good.
Well, that just almost obviated the question I was going to ask, and that is anyone doing a fish count up near the dams or on the river?
One thing, it doesn't answer your question directly, but Lacey has pointed out in other settings, which I really appreciate, and that is, as far as the interests, as you all know, Western water has many interests, and it can be a very complicated, very litigious area. For the city, we're aligned with the fish. What's good for the fish is good for the city. So, and Lacey can explain why that is.
Yes, so obviously fish need adequate water supply to reproduce and thrive for their habitat. So what that means is that they're typically releasing enough water downstream to make the fish happy, also make our water treatment process flow smoothly. So there's a certain amount of flow that we need in the water to be able to produce drinking water, and that flow is always met by what the requirement is for fish fish flows as well. So typically, we're right around, 1,000 CFS in those very dry summer months, which is more water than what is required for our water intake to produce drinking water. So we do benefit off of the requirements set for fish.
Mike Becker, City Club. There are other toxins or bugs that get in other people's water supplies around the country too that come to mind are Giardia, and I think it's called Cryptosporidium. How well does our current system deal with them, and how well will this ozone system deal with them?
Thank you for the question. Giardia and Cryptosporidium are ubiquitous in surface water supplies. Cryptosporidium kind of captured our imagination a couple decades ago when there was an outbreak in the Midwest, which caused some fatalities. So Cryptosporidium is now one of the, has been added to the list of pathogens that we actively treat. So your question was, how well will ozone deal with Giardia and Cryptosporidium, and how well does your current plant address those things? And the answer is very well. Slow sand filtration is a great, very slow-moving filtration system that allows those contaminants that are relatively large to be removed through the slow sand filtration process. If any Giardia got through, chlorine is very, very effective at basically lysing the Giardia cells. Cryptosporidium is a little more difficult to get at with chlorine. That's why the filters are so important in terms of dealing with crypto. But chlorine and ozone both are powerful oxidants that are effective at destroying Cryptosporidium as well.
Hans West City Club. Is algae season, is that just a Willamette Valley season, or does it extend to other communities or even nationwide? Is there data on that?
So I'm going to answer your question in two different ways. Based off of our experience in sampling up at Detroit Reservoir, we typically notice that there's a bloom that forms roughly in May. That's going to be dependent on how full the reservoir is, how much precipitation we've been getting up in that area, what the weather conditions are. And so it could be early May, could be late May, could be June. We start monitoring and historically have started monitoring for algae usually in April when we have good access to the lake and conditions start to change. So the regulations also now have identified a regulatory monitoring season, and that really is May 1st through October 31st. We as the city will be up on the lake for that regulatory season, but also depending on weather conditions and climate, whatever we see, we'll respond accordingly.
If I may just add to that. My question was partly, is this extending to other communities, other states? Are we seeing a broader geographic, even worldwide season, so to speak?
Yeah, I will hand that to Jude.
Lacey mentioned that algal toxins are on the UCMR4, part of that wide net that the EPA is casting. And the reason they're on that list is because we are seeing algal toxins occur in water systems. Toledo had a kind of famous event, very analogous to Salem a few years back. And so we are seeing increased algal toxins, not just in the Pacific Northwest, but in other regions as well.
Tom Bailey, City Club. If the Corps does indeed build this cooling tower at Detroit, is there concern that that will stir up the bottom or whatever, and heavy metals or dioxin or other contaminants might enter the system? I mean, the cooling towers have been built elsewhere, and what's happened with those?
That's a great question. Of course, anytime there's any sort of construction, there is the possibility to allow any sort of contaminant that's been attached to sediment or buried in sediment in the reservoir to be re-exposed. I can tell you that the Corps has done, the Army Corps of Engineers has done some sediment testing to look at what is there. That report is online and is available for folks to review. Nothing that they found from that report was super unsettling. And so I would venture to say as part of their progress with this tower, that that's something that they will continue to look at. But in parallel, we are making our advancements through the design and construction of our own ozone plant, which will better suit us to be able to handle other contaminants as if there are any, and if they move down into the river system towards the Guerin Island treatment facility.
Cindy Condon, Salem City Club member. Actually, I have two questions. One, we've heard today terms like cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, cyanotoxins. Can someone relate those to, or are you referring to the same things in some instances? And secondly, related to Tom's question, will the cooling tower make the water condition cooler and therefore fewer algal blooms, its impact on what we're talking about today?
So that also is a great question. Sometimes when we talk, the terms that we use kind of get interchanged. So blue-green algae and cyanobacteria are one of the same, so that's the actual bug or the algae. What happens is when these algae or cyanobacteria are stressed or they die, the cell bursts open or they lyse, and what is released is this cyanotoxin. And so they're two very different things. One is the live little algae, and the other one is a chemical. The cyanotoxin is a chemical that's released when that cell is stressed. As far as the water tower, I think that what really more so for me is of a concern is the water temperatures in the reservoir themselves, how warm those temperatures are. We shouldn't notice, based off of the mixing that they do, a temperature change that's going to greatly impact our ability to treat water. I think we'll continue to see the harmful algal blooms in the reservoir, but not all of that actually make its way to the log boom area or make it downstream. Some of those blooms are isolated to different arms of the reservoir. So when we're monitoring at the log boom, and that's a decision-making location for us as far as implementing additional treatment. But we are also monitoring in other areas of the reservoir, which are not close to the log boom, which is the area of water, the column of water, which is then released downstream by the dam system. So Heater Creek, Blowout Creek, those areas are kind of notorious for a bloom formation, but just because they're at those locations does not mean that we'll have an impact to our drinking water, because it may not move all the way to the log boom and downstream.
I understand that I'm the last question. Victor Doty, or Salem City Club. I think this may be a question for a city manager. We've been talking about the recent past and the near future in terms of the drinking water. My question relates to the distant future. What is the city doing to develop new water sources, not well fields, but new water sources on the west side?
Well, actually, that actually might be a question, and since Brian hasn't had to say a word yet, I'm going to defer that to our city engineer.
Yeah. So thank you, Brian Martin, city engineer. I'm glad to answer a question finally. So you had mentioned what are we doing on the west side in addition to groundwater wells. At this point in time, our focus is getting Guerin Island up and running. Our second focus is we know that we can get 10 to 20 million gallons of groundwater at Guerin Island fairly easily, and so our focus is on that. We're working on our aquifer storage and recovery facility in South Salem. And then we've got a couple wells in the city that we're looking at bringing up to speed. One of them is in West Salem. So right now our focus is on groundwater. At the same time, we're updating our master plan for drinking water, and that master plan is going to look at perhaps a facility in West Salem that could take water from the Willamette River. So that's less uncertain at this point. The master plan will tell us if that's a good option, but with the groundwater wells we know right now, those are very good options.
We're happy to stay afterwards if anyone wants to talk to us individually, and also I would offer, I'm not sure who the best point of contact would be, but if anyone is interested, especially if you're part of another group or perhaps the City Club would like to take a field trip, and that is to take a tour of Guerin Island. It's really a beautiful site. It's your water treatment plant, and it's really it's a great way to spend, I would recommend a spring or fall afternoon as a great time to visit, and we'd very much like to show you how your water treatment plant works. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's give them a round.